All right, folks, it is November 14th, 2023, and I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Andy Schekman back onto the show. Been running Miles Franklin here for 33 years of outstanding service. They've been dishing out the precious metals, and you know we're all about it here on this channel. We're talking about the current events, the financial markets, and how to get on the right side of this transfer of wealth. I am your host, Zach Rector. This is a few times that we've had Andy on now, and I'm glad that we were able to get you on here, Andy. I know you've been a very busy man with your business, and I know you've been a very businessman as everyone is seeking out your insight on the broader macroeconomics in the financial market situation.
I appreciate it, Zach. It's good to be back, brother. It's nice to see you again. Hopefully, I'll get to see you in person again up here in Vancouver in January. But yeah, time is flying. I can't believe we're already at the end of the year and the holidays. It's amazing how fast things are actually spinning. And with that, there seems to be so many things around us that are spinning out of control. I look back to when I started in this industry in 1989, and it was before the internet, man. I mean, it makes me feel old, but it was my first daughter, who was my second child, was born the day Facebook came out. I've seen so much change in my career. But it started out where things happen so slowly, and the change, the dynamic change that we would see would be so slowly, and there'd be one or two events a year maybe that would become newsworthy. And kind of like a roll of toilet paper, at the beginning you don't notice it spinning, and as it gets closer to the end it starts to spin faster and faster and faster and faster. Cardboard's coming. It's kind of how I feel about the state of affairs today. They're spinning so fast, and in the short span of 10 months since I had lunch with you in Vancouver, 11 months, it just seems that every single day there is something so newsworthy to talk about. And it's good to come back and chat with you about a few of them. I really do appreciate the invite very much.
For me, getting that exposure to a different group, a different crowd that definitely has developed patience, and that's the precious metals. We met up in Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. And to your point, our crypto space here, and this younger generation, myself included, we're still learning patience. And in the crypto space, we want to get pumped. We want to send it to the moon. And in the middle of a bull trap rally, in my opinion, for the cryptocurrency space and even the broader equity markets, I do want to provide context to everyone where we're at. So this morning, we got further economic data. The inflation did come back down. I think, what was it, 3%, Andy? 3.1.
Yeah, but I mean, look, the CPI ought to be called the CPI, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you ought to just pull the L out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and call it the BS instead of the BLS. It excludes food, energy, and housing. And what is more expensive these days than energy and then food and, well, housing? So it's a situation where it is massaged to meet an agenda. But yes, evidently inflation is coming down, if you want to believe that narrative. I happen to think it will only go higher and higher and higher, not as much as a consequence of the fact that the government, look at it this way. Let's just balance the budget today, okay? Forget about the fact that in the month of October, the U.S. government spent $500 billion. Zach, it took almost 200 years for the U.S. to spend its first $500 billion. We did it in the span of 4 weeks. Let's just pretend it's balanced. How the hell do you pay for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government military pensions, which exceed $130 trillion in unfunded liabilities? That's on top of the $33 trillion debt that we have. The unfunded liabilities are 4 times as high. And a trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. So when you look at it just from a standpoint of how the U.S. handles its obligations, in an environment where the manufacturing base has been eviscerated, where all we produce anymore are financial assets, how do you do it? How do you do it as rates have risen? How do you do it as the economy is slowing down? It becomes a challenge. And then you throw into the mix my central point of focus for the past several years, and that is of the global de-dollarization and the drive away from the petrodollar and what happens when the world starts to, or continues to, shall we say, and increases the speed at which they de-dollarize. And that to me has always been my focus, that ultimately the inflation will be more a byproduct of dollar dumping or de-dollarization than it will be of rapid printing. Now, you can say both are happening, but we have a government that is incredibly addicted to spending. And, I'll give you an example. We're getting close to another debt ceiling issue. We got to raise the debt ceiling again. I just put it to you this way. Inflation is here to stay. When Janet Yellen said, hey, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, then we're going to default. What she said right there is admission that the United States system is a Ponzi scheme. That's an admission of it, because what is a Ponzi scheme? Ponzi scheme is you got to keep money coming in the front door to pay it out the back door. Well, I mean, how are we paying for all of these liabilities we have, including giving $150 billion to the Ukraine and doing all of these things that we have to pay for when we are so massively indebted? Well, we're adding 2 to 3 trillion a year in debt, and this becomes a very, very, I think, a very, very big problem. And ultimately, whether it be by the world dumping dollars or by us trying to continue to finance all of these liabilities, I look at it as almost a certainty that we see dollars dumped across the globe in this growing chorus of countries that are coming together in the BRICS that are already trading in local currencies and chipping away at the settlement value of the dollar, which will ultimately affect its reserve status. And the bottom line is simply this, is that I truly do believe that inflation will only go higher, whether it be by our trying to maintain our obligations, both funded and non-funded, or more likely a situation where the dollar loses its primary reserve status as the petrodollar. And that's been something I've talked about in over 1,300 videos in 4 years. And when that happens, we just get overwhelmed with the rest of the world's dollars that they no longer want, which creates a massive inflationary event. And the reason I have focused so much on that is because people say, well, what choices does government have to pay this enormous liability of, 150 or 60 trillion dollars in both funded and non-funded liability? Remember, a trillion seconds ago, 31,688 years ago. How the hell do you pay this off? Well, there's two choices that people will tell you. There's inflate or default. And my choice is the third choice, and that is to find a villain to incentivize the world to no longer take dollars, collapse the dollar system, the dollars collapse, and it's those sons of bitches who did it to us. It was Xi Jinping, it was Putin, it was OPEC. How could they do this to us? And now you have a system that resets, you have a system that is killed by inflation, and you have a villain to point to. So whatever they are telling us about the 3% CP lie, to me, is just noise, and it's peripheral noise. I think that in the end, inflation will be the defining characteristic or the undoing of the dollar as the single solo petro standard world reserve currency. I really, truly do that inflation, this is going to be the good times in terms of inflation. I see it only going higher.
Spot on as always. And let me just add a little bit more on what Andy said as we try to decode this data. Like you said, the CPI lie, 100%. So the market right now, I just pulled up Market Watch, the front page, Dow's up 500 points. And so everybody gets in and cheerleads. And we're supposed to feel warm and fuzzy inside because they've brought inflation down to 3%. And if we were rolling with Paul Krugman's favorite it's super core PCE, it removes housing, shelter, used cars, and everything else that matters. And this is how we come up with these new inflation gauges, right? It's an absolute joke. But what we see, to highlight what Andy's saying, the DXY dollar index went up to a high last year because the Fed had raised rates at the fastest pace in history. We got a strengthened dollar, and this brought inflation from 9.1%, which is still a lie. Remember, whatever they're telling us, double it, round up, and that might get you close. And it can be worse on other commodities and real assets right now too. And so last year the DXY tops out because the Fed raises rates at the fastest pace in history. This is rug pulling Main Street economy. Real estate's lagging, and the equities market's just too stupid to realize what's happening. They're cheerleading off the fact that the Fed has won the fight against inflation, listening to talking head pundits like Paul Krugman, who are saying that the Fed has already won the fight against inflation. Meanwhile, the middle class and Main Street is getting absolutely squeezed. And to highlight the market movement right now too, gold up again, silver busting back up through $23. And so, yeah, we saw inflation come back down, but you have Peter Schiff and others who suggest that inflation is bottoming out before the next leg up. Is that kind of what you're suggesting for the inflation that could be coming our way next year, Andy?
100%, not even close. Absolutely. And the worst part about it is I could see hyperstagflation, which is an economy that is losing steam, completely sputtering or spinning its wheels in an environment characterized by rising prices, higher taxes, and an economy that's really not doing much at all, little or no economic growth, and rising prices. Absolutely, I see that. Look, I think there's absolutely no chance that the government will make the very difficult decisions. What Janet Yellen should have said, instead of saying if we don't raise the debt ceiling, we're going to default, calling it a Ponzi scheme, what she should have said is, listen, it's time for us to rein things in. We're going to raise the mandatory retirement age to, or minimum retirement age to 75 years. We're going to close all of these military bases around the world. We're going to stop giving money to whether it be ideas or countries or whatever it may be that we can't afford. We're going to stop doing that. We're going to cut entitlements, and it's going to be very tough. But we need to do this in order to protect this country and future generations. Instead, she said, look, we just maxed out all our credit cards. And if American Express doesn't give us a new black card, well, we're going to have to default. I mean, it really is admission of a Ponzi scheme. And I think indeed that this is nowhere near the end of our inflationary troubles. It's just more along the lines of the U.S. government trying to blur the reality that unfortunately is just making it, I think, that much more of a trap for people who are going to be caught off guard by what they have no idea, they don't see coming. Look, the rest of the world is in a very cohesive way. A large portion of the world is pushing back against the dollar. And when the dollar is no longer used as the world reserve currency for oil, and I see that time coming very, very, very soon. We could talk about that. Obviously, the BRICS and the de-dollarization and the growing number. 27 more countries have applied to the BRICS. You put that together with the Belt Road Initiative, where all of the OPEC countries are, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union, who the president of Belarus has just called for them to join the BRICS. I've been saying that for 2 years, that they will. They're all the same countries. And when all of these countries that represent 85% of human population that are not going green, and we are, say, hey, look, you guys signed an executive order to go green. We're not matching with you ideologically. The BRICS area is growing so fast. They control most of the world's oil and commodities. Look, we're going to go a different way. You guys go green. We appreciate all you've done for us. But hey, we're being protected by 2 of the 3 largest nuclear arsenals on the planet now. So we've decided to take oil and other currencies, and bang, just like that. Every single country that's had to stockpile dollars for 50 years to buy oil has no reason to hold it anymore. And if you remember the last scene of the movie Trading Places, where the 2 Duke brothers are watching their fortune evaporate because they're on the wrong side of the trade, and he says, sell, Mortimer, sell, as he's dying of a heart attack. That's exactly what will happen, in the respect that every country will at that moment will be incentivized to shed dollars, and it overwhelms the issuer, that being us, the United States, and a flood of dollars, a tsunami comes across the ocean and hits the shores. The byproduct of that moment is interest rates, not controlled by the Fed, but by the market. The market says, no. You can't have 20% inflation with all of those dollars coming home without raising interest rates to compensate. You can't have 5% interest rates and 20% inflation. You might as well use dollars as toilet paper. The point of it is now you have a villain that created this moment that you can point to. The market lifts interest rates up instead of Powell, but that resets the system. Stocks, bonds, real estate, they all reset. You know what? Here's something really kind of on a side note here, really kind of creepy. You know, that is reminiscent of what Klaus Schwab says. You'll own nothing, you'll be happy. Great reset. Well, it is a way to do it and to point to a villain, but Thomas Jefferson said the same thing 300 years ago. And I'm going to get it kind of wrong, but he said, if we allow a central bank to control our currency, first by inflation. Now, we've seen the inflation. They printed more money in 4 years than in the history of the country before it. 80+% of every dollar in circulation was printed in the last 4 years while suppressing interest rates. This created massive distortions in asset prices, misallocations. So first by inflation, then by deflation, we will end up renting back the land that our forefathers conquered. Now think about the deflation part. Everyone keeps talking about the M2 falling off the cliff. Why is that happening? Because the Fed and the Treasury are aiding and abetting this exodus out of the banking system, destroying the money supply because they're chasing yield. You can go right to treasurydirect.gov and buy treasuries paying more than you can get anywhere else, including a money market or any CD. You take all bank risk out of it and you're giving that money to the Treasury for their bonds, their short-term treasuries. That is also pulling money out of the system. It's deflationary. First by inflation, then by deflation. So what does that really mean? Well, think about it. All of the prices that were inflated, you got all these people in mortgages at 3 and 4%. They feel, hey, that's awesome. I'm psyched. Got a 4% mortgage on a $500,000 house. What happens if you lose your job as the economy continues to slow in this deflationary environment? How do you maintain it? So first will be the commercial real estate that blows up, which will then have its effect on the residential. We're not there yet, but first by inflation, then by deflation. Well, that's exactly what's happening. And it's very reminiscent to what Klaus Schwab said. And I just want to make one other point to kind of, because I know I'm kind of going all over the place, but one of the things that I haven't talked with you about that really is eye-opening to me. I've said all of this stuff publicly for 4 years. But if you look at the two lead economic advisors to the US government, it's very scary. Number one is a man named Jared Bernstein, who has a degree in music and a master's degree in social work. He is the chief economic advisor to this country, and his entire thesis is to lose the world reserve status. He's written about it. It's been picked up in the New York Times and the Washington Post. He wrote an article called Dethrone King Dollar. When Trump slapped tariffs on China, he said, good, hopefully we lose the reserve status. That was picked up in the Washington Post. If you wanted to lose the reserve status, you weaponize the dollar, you kick Russia out of SWIFT, you make the rest of the world say, shit, are we next? And then you tell the linchpin of the dollar hegemony, Saudi Arabia, hey guys, we're going green. We just signed an executive order. But hey, thanks for everything. You have just incentivized the world to find an alternative to the dollar and to dump the dollar as the petro status. Couldn't draw it up any better. But then you look at the number two economic advisor, and I'll tell you something, Zach. The number two economic advisor is just as scary. It's Lael Brainerd. She is a modern monetary theorist. She worked at the Treasury. She was vice chair at the Fed under Powell, and she worked point with MIT in developing the central bank digital currency that Biden signed an executive order. And she also ran point on FedNow, which just came out 2 months ago. A lot of people don't know what that is. I'm sure your people do. But that's Venmo and Zelle backed by the Federal Reserve. That will be the death knell of checks and of wires within a year. Every bank will then use FedNow, just like that instantly. Oh yeah, I just FedNow you $1 million. It's in your account. Go ahead and buy me some gold. Point of it is that that's the appetizer into the central bank digital currency. But she wants to get rid of the banks. She wants to call them and have a central bank digital currency issued by the Fed. She did develop this with MIT. Now, if that happens, what do? You got to get rid of the banks. How do you get rid of the banks? Well, you allow the money markets to put their money in the overnight reverse repo market. That sucked $1 trillion out of the regional banks, going to the too big to fail banks, because in a regional bank, you get 4.5% in a 1-year CD, or in a money market, you get 5% with daily liquidity. Money markets are run by the commercial banks. Everyone leaves the regional banks, making them about this close to blowing up. Yeah. And then what does the Treasury do? Oh, we'll give you short-term treasuries higher than that. So all that money is leaving the repo market, going right to the Treasury. And all of that money is leaving the system, first by inflation, then by deflation. The money is leaving the system. The banks are fractured. They are massively over leveraged and undercapitalized. And you see an event where interest rates spike, the banks, boom, every one of them blows up fast because they're already underwater at these rates. You see the market push rates higher, it blows it up. But that's exactly what Lael Brainerd wants. She wants a modern monetary theorist dream, and that is a central bank digital currency where you have 4 or 5 commercial banks doing loans and mortgages and whatnot, and the 4,500 regional banks dead in the water. You couldn't draw it up any better. So yes, I do think there will be an event, and I think that event is coming. And that event will be that the market dictates interest rates, not Powell. And the villain, well, that's those guys who did it to us. It's option C. A is inflate, B is default, or C is find a villain. And we didn't do this. It wasn't the fact that our brain dead monetary policy put us in this position. It's those bastards. And this country is naive enough to believe it. And honest to God, I believe that's exactly what they're trying to do. So guys like you, God bless you, telling people, hey, get metals, get crypto, get it in your own possession, remove counterparty risk. And that's going to be, in my opinion, the only way that you get out of the way of what's coming. And most people have no clue what's coming. But if you just take a look at the moves we are making outside this country and inside, and one last piece, and then I'll shut up and answer any questions you have.
Good.
To make it really effective, what do? You create massive divisiveness within this country, and there's no unity. You have 65% of America living paycheck to paycheck, 45% earning over 6 figures paycheck to paycheck. Everyone is at each other's throats. There's lawlessness, there's divisiveness. It's red, it's blue, it's black, it's white, it's vax, it's no vax, it's rich, it's poor. We're not a united country anymore, because every time we've ever had our backs to the wall as a country, like after World War II or the Great Depression, we were united. We believed in God. We believed in religion. We believed in respecting authority. We the nuclear family, all of these things that made this country special are kind of floating off into the ether. Yeah, so I hate to say it, but honest to God, I believe like this is part of a bigger plan. And this isn't about the CPI and all of the micro. That's noise to me, although we should look at it and talk about it. To me, it's a bigger picture, is that we have crossed the Rubicon. We're almost at 130% debt to GDP. We're a couple percent below that. There has never been a country in history ever that has crossed that line that has not defaulted outright or by hyperinflation. So I don't know. Are we almost there? Is it going to happen? Don't know. Is it by design? Don't know. It sure seems that way to me, but that's the way I look at the world, Zach. And all of the pieces that we're going to talk about here only support a bigger picture for me.
And that's the point, is every single day I come on, and when I do updates on the financial markets, I have to decode the data and to explain to folks, because there's this sentiment that I see, especially on Twitter, where as long as crypto's pumping, as long as my stocks are pumping, I don't care about anything else. I don't care about the world around me burning down. I don't care that Main Street's getting wiped out by inflation, as long as my stocks are going up, as long as my crypto's going up. And so we've been trying to decode this data and explain why we still hold the investment thesis that I have. And I'm not here to be anybody's financial advisor, but I think that you hit the nail on the head. What's the opportunity right now? Utility with no counterparty risk. What is that? That's precious metals, commodities, that's real estate, that's cryptocurrency. We don't buy 20 different cryptos. I don't do meme coins, and I don't even daily trade, right? I'm stacking positions in 1, 2, maybe 3 positions within crypto with real utility, real partnerships and adoption. And then I've been stacking my silver on the other side of my portfolio for defense. Are we going to see gains in silver and gold? I definitely expect some. And I want to get your take on a comment that I just heard from Rick Rule. I've been sharing this one, and I've been relating it back to crypto as well. I just heard Rick Rule say, I don't invest in gold because I want it to go to 2,100. I invest in gold because I'm scared it's going to go 6,000 to 8,000. Your take on that, Andy?
Yeah, I think that's what he's basically saying, is that, look, here's a piece of silver, and imagine it's sitting on the ledge of the bathtub. on the rim of the bathtub, and the water underneath it drops. It's not that silver and gold went to, or let's just pretend it's gold. That gold went to 6,000. It's that the dollar underneath it went, in which we measure it against. It takes 6,000 of these currency units that are losing value. What he's saying is that the dollar is going. He's afraid that the dollar is in big trouble. And let's put that into another context. Look, it just hit all-time highs in many of the currencies around the world, including the second and the third largest economies in the world, in China and Japan. It hit all-time highs in Canadian dollars and Australian dollars and in United Kingdom pounds. And I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And that is that the dollar is inordinately and unjustifiably strong. And that is blurred, to your point, the inflation numbers. It's blurred the utility in precious metals. But I don't think we've seen anything yet. The synthetic demand that has been created by the fact that every country on the planet has to stockpile dollars in order to buy oil. I mean, what I am saying is exactly what Rick is saying. In the respect, he says that he's very, very eloquent and articulate. And what he's basically saying is he's afraid of the dollar getting clobbered. Ultimately, where gold and silver go to that level, it's not that gold and silver went that high, it's that the dollar went that low. And it takes that many more dollars to buy it. And in that moment where the dollar is dumped globally, because you no longer, look, the synthetic demand where you've had to own dollars to buy oil, 90% of the oil sold throughout the globe in the last 50 years has been in dollars. So that demand for dollars is enormous. Well, what if that demand is no longer relevant? And all of those dollars are dumped. We don't need them anymore. We're going to take yuan or the new BRIC settlement currency that will be coming out in August, or gold or ruble or rupee. I don't care what the hell it is. I mean, they just came out with something called BRICS Pay. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Just came out. I'm sure you are. You focus on crypto stuff too. And that BRIC Pay is a new financial settlement platform that will allow these countries to trade in their individual currencies until there is a joint settlement currency. All of this erosion, the chipping away at the settlement value of the dollar hegemony will at some point change from chipping to cutting off at the head. And when that happens, those dollars literally overwhelm the United States, creating hyperinflation. That's when you see gold at that level. So that's, I think, what he's saying. And another way of saying that is you don't buy it to get wealthy. You buy it because it is wealth outside the system. Be careful what you wish for. At $8,000 an ounce gold, what's that McDonald's hamburger going to cost? You can be able to find a McDonald's hamburger. You know, what's it going to cost to buy a cup of coffee? $6? I don't know. So that's kind of what it's getting at. And when you think about that, I mean, look, I was born in 1970. I remember I lived 2 blocks away from a movie theater, and Star Wars came out. I was 7 years old. I must have saw it 50 times. It was $2 to buy a ticket to a movie. What's it now? 15? My dad bought a Corvette in 1973 for $6,000, brand new. Now it's well over $100,000. The GI Bill was $10,000 when people got back from World War II. That doesn't even buy you a casket anymore. And one last point, just to show how the value changes over time. What if it happens all at once? When my dad graduated college in 1963, he said he dreamed of having a $10,000 a year job. It was a dream. What does $10,000 buy you anymore? The point of it is that over time, inflation has really destroyed the value of the dollar. What if everyone dumps dollars at once? Then what does it look like? Then you see gold at $6,000 or $8,000 an ounce like that. And is that a scary moment? You bet your ass it is. And if you don't have something outside the system in your own possession, the removal of counterparty risk, I believe, and you did make one point about real estate. I agree, but only if it's paid for. Everyone should download the free book, The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. It'll blow your damn mind. I mean, it'll blow your mind if you read it. It's free and it's online. It's called The Great Taking. It's incredibly researched. And look what they have to say about anything that has debt attached to it. It speaks to the removal of counterparty risk in a way that I've never seen before. I just started reading it. I'm almost bummed that I started reading it because it's scaring the shit out of me. And I don't like what I'm reading, but it's factual. Everyone kept saying, you got to read it, got to read it. Finally, I downloaded it. It's for free. The Great Taking, David Rogers Webb. Read it.
I'll check it out.
You want to have assets fully paid for in your possession, no counterparty risk, because when all breaks loose, counterparty risk will be a very ugly phrase that will only get uglier and uglier, I think, as things start to unravel and unwind. So yeah. I think it's never been more important to remove as much as possible counterparty risk. And if you have real estate, make sure it's paid for best you can. Try to remove that debt attachment to it. Read that book, you'll understand why.
Yeah, it's financial contagion, and they can't contain it, right? It just keeps spreading right now, and it is breaking as we're, unfolding. The last time I had you on, I think, was March, and so much was breaking during the banking crisis at that time. And I call her Janet No Tellin' Yellen, because she's not telling you the truth. It's just like Powell. These guys get up on there and they do their little dance. And you were talking about this gang that's been assembled there in the White House and even in our Congress too. Gary Gensler at the helm of the SEC also comes from MIT and definitely a fan of CBDC. Just like Elizabeth, I got a plan for that, Warren. They don't want us to own the underlying assets that are actually fundamental with no counterparty risk, real utility. They want us in their system of CBDC, FedNow, and control. And so you're exactly right. And I wanted to highlight, because folks really get confused between inflation, deflation, and stagflation, but it's so important what you said. And I think that you're right about stagflation leading to this, you'll own nothing and be happy, because what stagflation is demand's falling off, but prices are still going up. And this is where the middle class gets wiped out.
Yep.
Right. This is the worst scenario for us. And it's why
it's the Great Depression meets the printing press.
Yeah. Yeah. With modern weapons of war, too, to fight over the commodities and the currencies and the resources that we now see. And to your point, Andy, it's already starting to break. The Japanese yen is trading against the US dollar at a level that we haven't seen in 33 years. To your point, over half a dozen currencies, major currencies, where gold's already back at all-time high. Yet fund managers right now are just waltzing in as happy as can be to that treasury to buy 5% risk-free reward. I call that doing a deal with the devil. It is an option, and I understand why big money, when you have billions to protect, I understand why you might go into some short-term T-bills like Warren and the big boys are doing. I get it. But for the average person, right, this is going to be a situation that continues to deteriorate. It's accelerating, to your point. Now in this information age, it's starting to move so rapid and fluidly. You mentioned the BRICS, and I wanted to highlight something. The alternatives are starting to present themselves, and as the world gets brought online, we really enable the ability for the world to accelerate the de-dollarization process. Because you mentioned settlements with BRICS, and we saw they had a major summit that they just had, announced more countries joining. There's a list behind them of countries that are trying to get in, and then there's a list of countries behind them that, even if they don't want officially to get into BRICS, they're done with the dollar, so they might as well be on that other side. But I wanted to get your thoughts on this, because I think this is the answer. Folks ask, where does this go? We return to a gold-anchored international monetary system that settles on distributed ledger technology. Is it going to be on XRP? And by the way, folks, I'm going to get Andy's thoughts on the potential fake XRP ETF, and we're going to be talking some crypto more later. But I want your thoughts on that, Andy, because this is how I think it plays out. A gold-anchored international monetary system that settles on DLT technology instead of settles on and is based on a US dollar convertibility to gold, as it was in 1944. Your thoughts on that?
What I've been saying for almost 4 years, that we will have a blockchain system that will peg. So let's go back. What happened in 2019? Well, the Bank of International Settlements, which is also the bank that says that everyone has to have a central bank digital currency by 2025. And if you look at the gross domestic product of the world, the countries that make up 96% of all the gross domestic product of the entire world all have a central bank digital currency in development. It's coming. Biden wrote it into executive order. That's why Lil Brainerd worked with MIT in development of it. That's number one. Number two, the Bank of International Settlements reclassified gold as the world's only other tier one asset. Well, do you think there's any, and that's next to US dollars and treasuries. Do you think there's any coincidence that the central banks have been buying it at levels that the world has never seen before, and nonstop. You just in Russia they have more gold than in the entire in all of the Russian modern history. They have more gold right now. China has, in terms of just last year, their last year acquisitions were more than ever, and their acquisitions this year are up 80% through the third quarter. They're gobbling it up. All the central banks are massively accumulating it. But and I've been saying this is exactly what would happen. They will use blockchain technology and they'll peg it to gold. So you got gold as a tier one asset. You have all the central banks who have repatriated their gold from the Bank of England and the New York Fed. They're all been on a massive buying spree using the suppressed price on COMEX to run cover for their de-dollarization and their massive accumulation and draining of the world's exchanges. That's a no doubter. You have the head of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, who said if you do not have a pegging to a central bank digital currency, it's fiat. You had the IMF earlier in the year, right around the time I saw you up there in Vancouver, come out with a report saying gold as an international reserve, ? A barbarous relic no more. And they're acknowledging it. And so you have the head of the IMF saying if it's not pegged to something, it's fiat. You have the head of the Russian finance minister who says we're going to issue a commoditized backed currency. And that's going to be gold, which is the only other tier one reserve asset. But I think, to your point, it will be on a distributed ledger because de Gaulle from France proved that convertible currencies convert. And he started to drain all the gold in 1971 from the US Reserve or from the Treasury because he saw we were printing more dollars than we had gold behind it to fund the Vietnam War. He called our bluff. That's why Nixon closed the gold window. So how can you do it so that doesn't happen again? Well, you use the immutability and the veracity of a distributed ledger. I'll let you comment to the XRP portion because you know much more about it. I don't know what the rails will be, but I do believe the only way that you make it work is to show the veracity and the immutability of the gold anchoring to the system. You don't have to make it redeemable that way if you have transparency and you can show that it's being audited and it's transparent. And the way that you can do it so that they still have monetary latitude would be to say, okay, 10% of every new currency unit has gold backing. And here it is on the distributed ledger for you to see, for the whole world to see. No one is lying. It's being audited every year by, 5 independent auditors who validate the veracity of what is being held, and the distributed ledger attests to that. And no, you can't take possession of it, but you can see we can't print any more money than this will allow us to do. You kill two birds with one stone. You give a system immediate credibility. Why else would the most powerful, influential bank on the planet, the BIS, the central banker's central bank, reclassify gold as tier one? Why else would all the banks repatriate their gold from the New York Fed and the Bank of England? Why else would the central banks be buying more gold right now over the last 20 months than at any time in central bank history? Why does the IMF say any central bank digital currency not pegged to something will be fiat? Why does the finance minister from Russia, who's controlling the whole financial picture of the BRICS, really the architecture of it, why is he saying it's going to be pegged to a commodity? What's the only other tier one asset? Gold. So yeah, I think that is exactly what's going to happen. I've been saying it forever, screaming that it will happen forever. And this is why the suppression of the Western markets is allowing people to not see what's happening. It has allowed all of the world central banks to massively accumulate metal. To give you an idea of how it works without getting too much into the weeds, if I have 5,000 ounces of gold in my warehouse, I have to sell 5,000 ounces on paper to remain market neutral. Because if the price of those 5,000 ounces goes down by $100, I'm out of $500,000. But if I'm short the same amount, it goes up commensurate. I'm market neutral. So in order for me to control a 100 ounce COMEX gold contract, roughly that trade might be less than $10. But I have to have roughly $7,000 in my margin account. And assuming the price doesn't go against me, that's it. So what if I have 500 million in my margin account? I control 15 billion of gold, notional gold derivatives. And what if I'm a big central bank or a commercial bank and I got $1 billion in my margin account? Well, now I'm controlling 30 billion. Do you see how I can paint a picture of reality? and I suppress the paper price. Everyone's looking over there. And when everyone's looking over there, I'm scooping up the metal like this and putting it into my pocket and draining the ETFs, draining the COMEX, draining the LBMA, draining the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And that's exactly what they are doing. And they've been doing this for a while because this is going to be the new system, as far as I'm concerned. It will be the new system because the United States is spending $200 million an hour servicing its debt. How long does that go up? To your point on Japan, gold has appreciated 50% this year against the Japanese yen. It's up tenfold in Turkish lira. Turkey was just told by the European Union, you're not coming into the union. And they said, pretty much, go screw yourself. We're going to join the BRICS, is basically what they're saying. It's up fivefold in Argentine peso. Who just joined the BRICS? Oh, yeah, Argentina did. So when you talk about this system, absolutely, it will be pegged to a commodity. And the only commodity that really makes sense, in my opinion, is the world's only other tier one asset, gold. What's the asset that almost every central bank on the planet owns? Gold. Who's been repatriating all their gold from the central banks? Or from the Bank of England, New York Fed, the central banks. I mean, you put it together. The only thing that I talk about that isn't fact is putting it all together. The pieces are all factual. Yeah. And if you look at all these pieces in and of themselves, well, they may not make sense or one of them at a time, but you put them all together, it's like, oh my God, this is exactly what they're doing. They're accumulating gold, they're de-dollarizing, they're building an infrastructure, and they're going to peg gold to it to make it legitimate. Because it's like your girlfriend or your wife cheats on you. You catch her cheating on you once, I'm so sorry. And she cheats on you again, please, I've made a mistake, it will never happen again. Well, how about the third time? You're going to trust her the third time? The point is, how many times does the US dollar or the Western system have to screw people before they finally say, we're done with you?
Right.
And I think that's happening. I think we've been caught cheating too many times. And the rest of the world is, whether it be about lying about the statistics or about money creation or about rehypothecation or whatever metric you want to use to talk about the fact that we are not transparent and perhaps not as honest as people would like to believe. The rest of the world is now finding safety in numbers, and they will use distributed ledger, blockchain, whatever. If it's XRP, great. I would believe that. But whatever they're using, they have to have something that immediately incites confidence, because that system was bullshit. And if we're going to do it this time, well, we need something pegging a system with immutability. Well, what better marriage could there ever be than blockchain and gold? And I think that's exactly what is the path.
Yeah. And I want to talk about just to wrap up this session with you, Andy, about how what they're setting themselves up to do is to custody these assets and lock out the poor and the middle class from actually owning them. That's the plan. Sure. We're right in the right spot. And to your point, I wanted to add some facts to what you're saying, right? And we'll let the audience piece it together. The central banks are buying more gold than they have in 50 plus years. We get that. Second point, what's the one crypto company that they're meeting with the most? Ripple. What's the most amount of CBDC projects that are live on the XRPL with Ripple? By far, it's 6 that have been announced. They have 10 partnerships with governments and central banks, 4 unannounced, 6 have been announced just 2 weeks ago. National Bank of Georgia was the most recent to build their CBDC on the XRPL. They're working with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority on tokenizing real estate. So it's not just CBDCs tokenizing real estate, but then we also saw the HSBC tokenized gold, and they're issuing that to their institutional clients. That was announced last week as well. So you can see what the plan is. And one final point on the BRICS. I made a video about this during the BRICS Summit. Many people were confused. I said, guys, the alternatives are already presenting themselves. The options are there. They're going to gold anchored and they're doing their own DLT, or what we've now seen is that there's actually 5 BRICS nations where on-demand liquidity is already live, settling with XRP. So yes, they're using gold, and we already have 5 BRICS nations where that's an option to use on-demand liquidity. And that's through banking partners with Ripple in those countries. And so Ripple's already setting up over there with central banks worldwide. And what I see is now we get this ETF news that came out just within the past 24 hours. And it reiterates the point that they want to control and custody these assets and then offer it to you while they can take fees, while they can be the managers, and you can be the peasant who never really owns it, but maybe you have a claim to it. And so what we see is the crypto space has been hyped over the last month. Bitcoin went from under 30,000 all the way up to 38,000 in the past month off of all of this hype and narrative around a Bitcoin spot ETF getting approved. And then last week, we saw a BlackRock filing for an Ethereum ETF. Now, over the past 24 hours, we've seen, and we can't confirm whether it's real or not yet, a BlackRock filing for an XRP ETF trust. Now, what happened last week was first we get the formation in Delaware for an Ethereum trust. And I made a video at the time and I said, guys, this is the precursor to them filing for an ETF. Well, sure enough, later that day, we got confirmation on the SEC's website. The S1 filing was made available to see that Ethereum ETF trust actually was filed for a spot ETF. So to make this simple for everyone to understand, we may or may not have one for XRP, but we without a doubt have ones for crypto coming in. And my audience knows I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin, Ethereum, but they have their place. That's fine. I'm more into XRP. But what we saw with gold after the ETFs got approved in 2003 and 2004 for gold ETFs is gold went up 500% after that. The underlying asset went up 500%. And so we now look at the same thing happening to the digital asset space, and you compare that with a gold that's had thousands of years of trading history versus a digital asset space that's only been around for 10 years, I think that we actually could see quite a bit more growth than 500%, right? And there's many expectations. As you said, the Bank of International Settlements is making everybody do CBDC by 2025, essentially. So the world's moving towards tokenization, and most of even the conservative estimates and white papers coming out of the IMF and the BIS says that we achieve about 10 to 30 trillion of tokenized assets over the next decade. So what is your thoughts? And then I wanted to highlight, because although the underlying asset rides a wave up because there's more demand for that underlying asset, this brings in the market manipulation as well. So your thoughts on the ETFs coming to the crypto space?
Sorry, I'm dealing with allergies. My eyes are watering. Yeah, I think it removes the purity of it. I think it's, to your point, I mean, GLD and SLV are massively manipulated ETFs. I mean, you look at the amount of backdooring of metal coming out of GLD and SLV, it's astounding. The naked shorting is astounding, to the point where, you know, you have thousands and thousands and thousands of shares that are naked shorted in both products, which is something they shouldn't be able to do. And at the same time, the authorized participants are taking massive redemptions of physical metal, backdooring it out of the ETFs. And, you know, when you talk about having claim to it but not owning it, that's exactly what this book, The Great Taking, talks about, is that the claim, you know, the way that the system has already been, and they've already ruled this way in court, that, you know, that the custodian, for example, the custodian of holding these assets on your behalf, if the institution fails, the custodian has claim above the whom they're holding the assets for. That if you don't have it in your own possession, unencumbered with no debt attached to it, it can quickly be taken away. And when you talk about, you know, I always looked at, people said to me, will gold and silver be confiscated? I said no, but what they have done instead is create SLV and GLD. SLV is either the number 1 or 2 largest stockpile of silver in the world. Who's it held by? Well, that's funny. It's held by BlackRock and JP Morgan. JP Morgan holds, according to Ted Butler, the largest position of silver the world has ever seen. Outside of this, over 1.5 billion ounces that they've accumulated. Look, they paid a $920 million fine, the largest fine that the Justice Department ever handed out at that point 2 years ago, for them manipulating the market, yet they're still allowed to run the world's largest silver trust. They were fined $960 million. Their trading desk, or $920 million, their trading desk made $1 billion that year. They walked away up $80 million. The point of it is that it has given I think it gives the institutions the ability not only to suck in all of the investment money, but then they could confiscate it, close it, shut it down, hold it all. And now you got BlackRock holding all of the XRP, or holding all of the Bitcoin, or holding all, I mean, BlackRock and JP Morgan are the administrators of SLV, and HSBC Bank is the administrator of GLD. You got the first or second largest stockpile of silver in the world and the third or fourth largest stockpile of gold in the world, held by these big institutions who are not our friends.
And now so, HSBC can offer the tokenized gold, and they're starting with institutional.
And they're the administrator of GLD. Do you see a conflict of interest here? I sure do.
Yeah.
And so while you get people cheering this because it makes the price go higher, it removes the purity of it. I just think that it's not a good thing, to be honest with you. I think it's better to keep these big behemoths out of being market makers or being involved at such a high level, because it gives them the ability, like you said, siphon in all the money and then, under the guise of national security. And if you don't think BlackRock's at that level yet, they sure as hell are. Under the guise of national security, we have to close this account. And because it's wreaking too much havoc on whatever.
Yeah.
Close the account and they have all of it in their possession. Could that happen? When people ask me, will gold be confiscated again? I say no. But the ETFs, you're holding more gold and silver in the GLD and SLV, run by the cartel criminal banks that suppress the price and are actually agents of the government, you could argue, are holding it all in a central location with a pink bow wrapped around it, rather going door to door to people's home who own gold and silver, who believe in the NRA and don't have patriotism the way they did in 1933. So could it be a setup for BlackRock to control the massive lion's share of all of these ETFs? Well, yeah, why not? And could it be the setup for, more privacy, or more of our privacies to be eroded, or our liberties to be eroded through something like that? Yeah, why not? If all of a sudden the dollar gets dumped and people are running to cryptocurrencies and BlackRock holds all the ETFs, listen, we're going to have to make it illegal because the dollar is being threatened. This is about national security. You can no longer own it, and these ETFs are confiscated. And whatever money you had in your ETF, well, guess what? It's in the new central bank digital currency in your bank account. So could it happen? Yeah. I am not a fan of these big institutions running ETFs. I would run the other way. But I can see why people would think it's bullish. I mean, it is. It's a huge infusion of money, maybe initially. But what does it mean in the end? I will tell you that I think GLD and SLV are two of the worst products ever made. And I would say, look, read the prospectus. Now, I know you asked me about something different, but they're the same. Like, if you read the prospectus of SLV, or GLD rather, I think it's pages 6 through 9 or 6 through 12, titled Risk Factors. I'll just give you an example. It says the custodian, that being JP Morgan and BlackRock, has the right to use sub-custodians. Okay, great. But the custodian does not reserve the right to visit the premises of the sub-custodians. And if the sub-custodians are storing gold that does not meet London Good Delivery Standards, in other words, lead bars painted gold, it's not their fault. It's not the custodian's fault. They are not responsible for the errors and or omissions of the sub-custodians. They've distanced themselves from liability tremendously. And if you read the risk factors on the prospectus of GLD and SLV, take a couple glasses of wine and sit down and read it 3 times. It'll blow you away.
Yeah.
It's like, really?
Well,
so I would assume there would be same verbiage within the ETFs for Bitcoin or for Ethereum or eventually XRP. It's not a good thing.
Well, it's so funny that you mentioned that, because literally in the BlackRock Bitcoin spot ETF filing, they mentioned the manipulation from Tether and the stable coins that have propped up Bitcoin and the broader cryptocurrency market. I mean, I've been shouting from the top of my lungs that this space is continually being manipulated, even into November of 2023, even today. Like, we're seeing massive manipulation with Tether still. Nobody knows what's backing it. And so, to your point, when my grandma finally, her financial advisor tells her, hey, Kay, we can make an allocation towards crypto, I'm going to tell her, okay, Grandma, we're not going to be investing in the XRP ETF. Let me help you set up a wallet and let's get the underlying asset in our possession. And so to wrap up this session, Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure. I want to help folks get the underlying assets to run the new financial system in their possession. And so folks know that they can go to my website to find crypto exchanges, wallets, and I am proud to have you as one of our affiliates for precious metals, Andy. And so tell folks where they can get in touch with you and what kind of offers you guys are running right now on precious metals. I have found that you guys have some of the best service in the industry, but also some of the best prices to go around too. And we really appreciate you hooking up the community. I would ask you how business is, but I know business is doing good because our community has been eating up the metals as of late. But tell us where we can find you and get your metals, Andy.
So you can go to our website. Our website is not where I would prefer people go. We only allow up to 10,000 in purchasing on there, and the prices are tiered on the website. They're not as attractive as if you send us an email at info@milesfranklin and request our more competitive price list for your people and for larger orders. And I don't care if they want to make a small order, your people do, they can get our competitive price list, which is very difficult to beat price-wise. It'll be as competitive as anyone in the country. That's info@milesfranklin. Say, Zach sent me. Yeah. And we will answer questions on IRA rollovers, on economics, on geopolitical events. Every one of our brokers, aside from being dear friends of mine outside of business, long before they ever worked for me, some of them going back to Little League and elementary school, every one of them would be my friend before they worked for me. They're all incredibly, incredibly smart. Most of them worked on Wall Street. One of them has a master's degree in business administration. One has a degree from Wharton's. Almost all of them worked on Wall Street. They're all smart as hell. And we'll answer your questions on anything from geopolitical events to economics to political events to whatever you want to talk about. You just want to place an order, fine. IRAs, rollovers, all of these things that people have interest in, just send us an email. Zach sent me. They'll be given special treatment. You'll get our more competitive price list that you won't see on milesfranklin.com. And we're honored to be part of what you're doing as well, Zach. You're very well read, very articulate, very smart, and you're on the cusp of what's happening, what's changing. And these are very, very important times that people need to be informed. And so we are honored to work with your people. Any questions that you have, if it's directed to me, say I must speak with Andy. Here's my question. info@milesfranklin. Zach sent me, and that's the best way to do it.
That's why we love our relationship, is because you're not just selling folks, you're educating them, and you're providing the most transparent service in the industry, Andy. So keep on leading the way. It's an absolute pleasure to connect with you today. And as we highlighted in the show, and I'll leave this final point, utility with no counterparty risk. We're not here to give you financial advice, but I'll tell you what Andy and I are stacking. It's utility with no counterparty risk. And I like that you mentioned that folks can roll over their 401k and their IRA with you as well. So folks, reach out to Andy, tell him that I sent you. You're going to get the best treatment in the space, along with the best transparency to follow it up. It's industry leading. And Andy, it's just a pleasure to call you a friend. I can't wait to see you at the next event. I know Vancouver's coming up here shortly, and it's going to be an absolute pleasure to connect again with you. Thank you for coming on today, Andy.
Yeah, man, maybe we can do a live stream together. Maybe you have a camera you can bring or a cell phone. We'll sit one night after the show shuts down and do a live stream and talk to your people, something like that. I'd love to do that. But either way, it's an honor to call you a friend as well, Zach. Thanks for having me, brother. You stay well, and I'll look forward to seeing you in a couple months. But happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there. Happy, healthy holidays and New Year, and God bless you all. Talk to you soon.
Amen. Thank you so much, guys. On the way out, if you could smash that thumbs up for us, we really appreciate it. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our updates. And it's always a pleasure. We will see you guys in the next one. God bless you all. Thank you.